Hey guys, it's me again, Eric here at Mountaintop 9, and in this video I want to pose a serious question, and the question is this: which vocalist was better in Black Sabbath? Was Ronnie James Dio the ultimate, or was it Tony Martin? Which one is the better frontman for the legendary Black Sabbath? Now, straight up, I'm going to tell you right now, I love both of these guys. When it came to Black Sabbath, the stuff that Ronnie was on and the stuff that Tony Martin sang on, all great albums. I mean, I love Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, Dehumanizer. Hell, even The Devil You Know, and I consider that basically a Black Sabbath album. I mean, let's get real here. Even though it went under the title Heaven and Hell as the band name, and you know, I like that one okay, but really the classic Dio stuff is Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and then Dehumanizer to an extent. It's kind of removed from those two. And then you've got Tony Martin singing on stuff like, you know, he came into the band and was on Eternal Idol, but after that, he really came into his own on Headless Cross and Tear. Both of those albums are fucking amazing, great, classy, heavy metal. And then after that, you've got Cross Purposes and even Forbidden. A lot of people have like this herd mentality. They're like sheep. They hear one person say an album's bad, and then they just kind of copy off of that. Everyone then, it kind of catches on, and it just kind of spreads around like a fucking game of telephone, and everyone's saying what a bad album Forbidden is. And oh my god, I can't ever listen to it again until it's remixed. Oh, it's got to be remixed. It's horrible. Just like they say about Born Again. They say, oh, Born Again, it needs to be remixed. Man, I like Forbidden the way it is. Honestly, I like that album the way it is, just like I like Born Again the way it is. So I don't go along with that whole mentality. They don't need to remix that fucking album. As far as I'm concerned, there's songs on Forbidden that are just amazing. And, you know, Kiss of Death is one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs of all time. And you've got other good stuff on Forbidden as well. And so I don't need it to be remixed. But anyway, let's get down to the pros and cons of each vocalist. We're going to go over what makes each guy stand out, and then any flaws as a frontman we're going to point out as well. First of all, with Dio, you've got an amazing voice. His voice is so commanding and so powerful that, I mean, it's just something that I can't even put into words how powerful his voice is. And then in addition to that, he's got a great range. Then as a frontman, visually, he had a great distinctive image. It was very alluring. He knew how to wear like the right stage attire as a frontman for Black Sabbath, and he would lurch around the stage throwing out that devil horn symbol that he brought into the band, you know, kind of as a counterpoint to the stuff that Ozzy was doing. You know, Ozzy would throw up the peace symbol, while Dio would do the flash the horns, which was much more fitting to Black Sabbath when you think about it. And, you know, so he had this dark, you know, alluring image, just a charisma for days. Dio had tons of charisma, so he came in and he had people in the crowd flicking him off. They didn't want to see anybody but Ozzy. But Dio came in there and he was confident, and he really just knew how to carry himself, had a great stage presence and tons of charisma. So you've got a great voice, you've got being great as a charismatic frontman, and then you've got the fact that he brought songwriting skills to the table, and lyrics. He would write his lyrics, help out with songwriting. He was a true musician. As well as being a great vocalist, he was a great musician. And he didn't take any guff off of anyone too. And that's the one flaw you can find with Dio when it comes to Black Sabbath, is that he had an ego, man. He didn't take any shit off of anybody. He was confident. He knew the talent that he was bringing to the table. So he commanded respect. And he also would kind of butt heads with Tony Iommi as far as like leadership of the band. As far as Tony Iommi was concerned, he was the leader of Black Sabbath. And that really came to a head when they were mixing the Live Evil album. You had Dio and Vinny Appice on one side, and then you had Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler on the other. And there was this division within the band. And you had, you know, from all accounts, when you read like the different Black Sabbath books, you had people working within the Black Sabbath camp that basically said, you know, Ronnie came into the band and he was basically like taking over the band. You know, Ronnie was a leader. He wasn't a follower. So when you've got someone like Tony Iommi, as far as he's concerned, Black Sabbath is his band. Well, that's where, they clashed. And like I said, it came to a boiling point when they were mixing the Live Evil album. And then when Dio joined again for Dehumanizer, all of those same kind of tension resurfaced when Ozzy's camp called and asked for Black Sabbath to come and open up at a couple of the farewell shows. Dio straight up said, no, I'm not opening for Ozzy. Dio said, I'm not opening for that clown. That's how he referred to Ozzy. Because as far as Dio was concerned, he was back in Black Sabbath and they were reestablishing themselves. And they had just put out a quality album. And, they were headliners. He wasn't going to go and open for Ozzy. That was a totally demeaning idea to him. And I totally understand that. And, at this point in time, in the early 90s, Ozzy commercially was at a high point, Ozzy had a ton of commercial appeal and notoriety, and his albums were still selling super well. He was playing large venues, whereas you had Dio and Black Sabbath both. Dio as a solo artist and Black Sabbath, there in the late 80s and early 90s, they were really on a commercial downswing. So Black Sabbath with Dio weren't playing the same size venues and shit like that. So it's understandable, obviously, that if they played with Ozzy, they would end up having to open for him. But, Dio wasn't going to do that. And I totally understand that. And it's also obvious when you see it from Tony Iommi's perspective. He's thinking about the fact, hey, if I can get back and reform with Ozzy again, and we do reunion tour and albums and all that shit, we'll be raking in the dough. And, Dio could see that, and he wasn't going to fucking do that, and he refused. And ultimately, he ended up out of the band again. And then, there's other stories about how strong-willed he was and how he wouldn't take shit off of anybody. In Tony Iommi's autobiography, he said how John Bonham came backstage after a Black Sabbath show on the Heaven and Hell tour. And he said about Ronnie, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, that singer's got a great voice for a fucking midget. Well, Dio heard this shit, and he fucking went up to John Bonham and he called him a cunt. He was pissed, and I guess according to Tony, they held John Bonham back or some shit. They had to diffuse the situation. But personally, I like that about Ronnie. I like the fact that he knew his worth, he knew how talented he was, and he stuck up for himself. So it's kind of cool how strong-willed he was and how confident he was. I think that's great. So that's how you have it with Dio. You've got a guy who's got an amazing voice, songwriting skills, lyricist, and he's got a ton of charisma. The only drawback with him within the confines of Sabbath is just having the ego, and then that would clash with Tony. Now, on the other hand, we've got Tony Martin, and here's the great things about Tony Martin. Awesome voice. He's got a very melodic voice that really brings out these classy elements in the songs and just really gets stuck in your head like ear candy. He's just got a great voice for the kind of music that Sabbath were churning out in the late 80s and early 90s. It just fit perfectly, because he also had Jeff Nichols really prominent in the band at that time with the keyboard melodies and the layering and everything. So when you have a voice like Tony Martin, it fit that shit like a glove. And so you got a great voice, great range too. Also, in addition to that, once you get to Headless Cross, Tony Martin was crafting his own lyrics. So you got good lyricists. Now, when you get to a drawback with Tony Martin, whereas Dio had a ton of charisma and was a very strong, magnetic frontman, well, with Tony Martin, you get kind of the opposite of that. As far as stage presence is concerned, he just didn't have that magnetic kind of personality on stage. Not the way Dio did. Dio would just walk on stage and he just, like I said, he had a magnetism. It was raw and alive and electric, the energy. With Tony Martin on stage, you didn't get that same kind of feeling. And that's not me bashing Tony Martin. I love the guy. Great fucking vocalist. If Tony Iommi were to get back together with Tony Martin tomorrow and go on a big tour, I would try my best to be at any show that I could, because I love the music that Tony Martin made with Sabbath. I'm just saying this is where there's a fork in the road as far as Dio and Tony Martin are concerned. Dio had a commanding stage presence and Tony Martin just didn't. It just wasn't there as far as that is concerned. Great vocalist and everything, just not the most electrifying stage persona, and then his style of dress and everything. There was just nothing that really caught your eye about him as a frontman visually on stage. Now, the other shortcoming with Tony Martin was that he would hit notes in the studio which were just so high that he couldn't replicate them in the live setting. Like, you know, that note in Headless Cross in the chorus there. You know, the Headless Cross line. You know that big high note he hits there. Well, in the live setting, he would just hold out the microphone. He wouldn't even try to hit that note. And you'd hear like either a tape playing it in the background, or you would hear Jeff Nichols replicating it. Because I think Jeff Nichols sometimes in the live setting would help out with those high notes in the background. Tony Martin oftentimes would try to duck and weave and not go for those highest notes during the live shows. And that's understandable. I'll tell you right now, he hit some amazing notes in the studio, and I gotta give Tony Martin credit for that. Even though he couldn't always replicate the same exact thing live, it's amazing hearing on those studio albums when he went in there and he took the time to hit some amazing notes. So I think that's still cool. It still shows he has an impressive range. Tony Martin had a very spectacular range, even if he couldn't always, you know, replicate it at shows. I still give him a ton of credit for doing it on record. So yeah, that's the thing where you got with Tony. And then another thing with Tony Martin is he didn't have, you know, the huge ego that Dio did. I mean, when he came into Black Sabbath, he looked up to people like Tony Iommi and Jeff Nichols, and then when Cozy Powell was in the band, he looked up to these people. He didn't view them on a peer level like Dio did. Tony Martin just felt like, hey, this is a great gig I got here, and he never knew quite where he stood and everything, so he just tried to make the best of things and just do the best damn job that he could. And of course, Tony Martin did an amazing job. So that's kind of where we stand with both vocalists. Dio and Tony Martin were both great vocalists. They both had impressive voices, and they also brought, you know, they contributed to the band as far as lyrics and everything. The only difference is really, the hugest difference is with the commanding stage persona, stuff like that. Dio has Tony Martin beat as far as that's concerned. But ultimately, when it comes down to who do I pick as my favorite frontman for Black Sabbath, do I pick Dio or do I pick Tony Martin? Well, I'll tell you, a few years ago, I made a video where I ranked the Black Sabbath vocalists. And in that video, I did pick Dio as the number one. But that was a few years ago. Right now, I'll tell you right now, here in the present day, and this isn't a fucking cop-out, okay? It isn't a cop-out at all. I'm just going to tell you right now, some things in life are just a tie, and there's nothing you can do about it. And how I feel right now, at this moment in time, is that I can't pick one over the other. Dio and Tony Martin in Black Sabbath for me are tied. I can't pick which one I like better because I love them both so much. So it would have to be a tie right now if I were ranking the Black Sabbath vocalists. I mean, just think about this. Do this exercise. Take Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. You got them in one hand. Then take Headless Cross and Tear in the other. Hold them both up and just look at the tracks on each album and compare both of those albums. And just think about how in both hands you have 4 of the greatest heavy metal albums ever made. Because that's how I look at those albums. You know, when you think about Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, they go together so fucking well. They're just 2 back-to-back classics. Well, when Tony Martin joined the band, you know, after they got past Eternal Idol, when they did Headless Cross and Tear, those 2 go together so damn well. All of the planets aligned on both of those albums the same way Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules did. And I just love the work that both of these vocalists did with Black Sabbath. We're talking about some of the best damn music ever created here. I mean, you can be listening to an album like Mob Rules and be listening to Turn Up the Night and Voodoo and Country Girl. And then you can throw on an album like Headless Cross and be listening to tracks like Nightwing and Kill in the Spirit World and Black Moon. You know, classic stuff, Devil and Daughter. And then don't forget about Tear with Sabbath Stones and Anno Mundi. I mean, and then, like I said, after that, go back to Heaven and Hell. Listen to Lonely is the Word and Wishing Well. I mean, we're talking about material of the highest quality here. I just can't pick one or the other, so I'm going to say that they are tied. I just love all the material that Sabbath did with both of these vocalists. Well, The Devil, you know, a little bit less, but everything else, Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, Dehumanizer, awesome stuff. and then all the albums Tony Martin did with Sabbath. Awesome stuff. So in the comment section below, let me know which vocalist do you like better in Black Sabbath. Do you like Dio better? Do you think he gets the nod? Or do you think Tony Martin is better? Let me know down below. Like I said, it's a tough decision for me, and at this point, I'm telling you they are tied. So you let me know, do you like one better than the other? Or do you think they're tied like me? So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be seeing you again really, really soon.